But first, you may know him as one of the founding members of the Black Crowes, or maybe you know him as the host of the nationally syndicated radio show, Steve Gorman Rocks. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the record show, Mr. Steve Gorman. Steve, thank you so much for being here today.
I am pleased to be here, sir. Thanks for asking me.
There is so much stuff that I'd like to cover with you, but first and foremost, man, let's talk about the Black Crowes. Let's get into the root of this. You were at the forefront, I think, of a great musical, I don't want to use the word revolution, but just kind of a great time in music in the mid-'80s through the late '80s into the '90s, really the height of college radio back then.
Right.
What was that like being in an up-and-coming group right at that time?
Well, it was huge to me. You know, I started when college radio took off. I started college in the fall of '83. You know, I went to college as a freshman at Western Kentucky University, and I hung a big REM poster up, you know, Murmur. That was my life in 1983, you know. So I was at a time that I look back on as my favorite time in music ever. REM and the Replacements and Let's Active and the DBs, mostly not by design. It just turned out to be a lot of Southern indie bands. You know, what '90s we called it alt rock. In the '80s, there was an independent music scene. There was a lot of towns, Athens, Georgia, primarily, but there was a bunch of great music coming out of the South at that time. And college radio really blew up in those years. And I was obsessed with all that. That's where I came from. The Black Crowes came out of a band called Mr. Crow's Garden. The members of Mr. Crow's Garden, me and the Robinson brothers, we all were obsessed with that scene. The local scene in Atlanta. You know, we're an hour away from Athens, Georgia. We had our own scene there, but it was kids from the '70s doing their own thing in the '80s, you know, taking a page, '70s music. You know, we all cut our teeth as kids listening to those records, but when it was time to start playing instruments, it was a little easier to play Replacements covers than Allman Brothers covers. You know what I'm saying? It was like,
yeah,
hey, how many chords are in this song? Do you have to swing or can you just hit hard? You know, that's where we started. And then I think by the time the Black Crowes became a band of the '90s, we were a pretty good mix of '70s and '80s. You know, the music of the '70s, the vibe and mindset of the '80s, it all combined. That's who we were anyway. But to answer your question, the music scene of the mid to late '80s was everything to me.
Now, as Shake Your Moneymaker hit, we just hit the 30th or 31st anniversary of that. Coming
31
out.
years now. It came out in
31 years now. So, wow. Okay. We're starting to feel a little bit there. What did that do to you as a musician and to the band as a whole to have that skyrocket?
The best thing we ever did was try to ignore all that was happening around us. And we tried to ignore the hubbub and become a great band. The Black Crowes, which I was obviously a part of this. This is not me pointing fingers. I'm saying we as a group lost perspective and lost our way many times, and we would gain it back over the years. The one thing we never lost sight of is we wanted to be a great band. We wanted to be one of those bands, you know. So when Shake Your Moneymaker started to explode, it took about a year to really get hectic. The record came out in February of '90. It went platinum in January of '91, and then over the spring of '91, it sold another 3 million copies in 3 months. Now that was when things started to get a little haywire around the edges. But we had really grown so much in that year. The calendar year 1990, we were on the road the whole year, and just getting on stage every night for the first time, touring nonstop and playing on average 6 nights out of every 7 for a whole year. You know, we became a pretty formidable rock and roll band. We got really good. We had good taste. You know, we would get on the bus every night and listen to Zeppelin bootlegs and Little Feat records and Stones from '72. And we were listening to bands that in 1989 we would have laughed if you'd said we were ever going to honestly try to emulate. But then as we grew individually as musicians, we grew collectively as a band. And it was a really great time. It was a great moment for the Black Crowes to arrive. Thankfully, the record blew up after we'd had a year to get good. If Shake Your Moneymaker had come out and done, like, say, compared to Nirvana, like if Shake Your Moneymaker had come out in February of '90 And by May of 90, it was the #1 record in the world. I don't think we would have handled that well. I don't think we would have been ready for it. When I think
would have
about
been
what they're about,
a different feeling.
I think we would have exploded. I don't think we would have handled it. I think we would have blown apart. I mean, exploded in a bad way. I think the band wouldn't have been able to. We weren't ready to have that many eyeballs on us. We needed time to become the band we wanted to be. We had a lot of ambition, and we had a long view on what the band could be. So it took us. We needed time to get there. So it worked out well in that regard. But when I think back to the day Shake Your Moneymaker was released, I worked in a record store in Atlanta, Georgia called Wax and Facts. It's still there. It's an iconic place in the Atlanta music scene. I still go there every time I'm in town. It's still my last real job. I loved my time there. It was one of the coolest jobs on earth as far as, working in a record store, used and new, mostly used back then. I could bring any album home I wanted as long as I returned it in the same shape it left the store in. There were some serious perks. And
well, I appreciate you calling working in a record store a real job. That helps.
But the day that record was released, you asked about Shake Your Moneymaker. I was working. I got up on a Tuesday morning, went in before we opened, and I was putting my own album in the bins, and I was like, I kind of thought I was supposed to be on tour by now or be a rock star or something, but I was still just doing it. But and I've told this story a million times because it's true and it's real. Seeing that album in that B section, like we didn't even have our own name tag. The Black Crowes didn't warrant their own piece of plastic with the name on it, so it was just the random B. It was in there with like next to the Bangles. I mean, you had the Beatles, you had Black Sabbath, but you didn't have a Black Crowes. You had and I'm flipping through it and I'm like, oh, Big Star, we're with Big Star now. And oh my God, that's great. We're with the Bangles and we're with all these B bands. And it felt amazing. I mean, I really felt like if this is as far as I go, this is amazing,
It sounds like a cool ride to take at that time.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about vinyl though, too, because you guys were at this onset back then, really kind of as vinyl was being slowly encroached upon by compact discs.
Yep.
And it wasn't too much long into the 90s that really kind of took over and became the preferred format.
Yeah.
We're coming full circle on this now. And what does that mean to you just as a musician to think that the idea of a vinyl record in someone's hand is the way that to go these days again?
Well, it's great. I mean, I didn't hold out hope for it. And I wasn't someone who necessarily resisted CDs. I wasn't the last guy on the island who didn't know the war was over. I was never going to be that guy. I prefer vinyl. There's never going to be anything that sounds better to my ears than vinyl. That said, I'm also a fan of, I love the idea that right now when I'm driving in my car, I can think of any song that I've ever heard. And if I want to hear it, I can find it and listen to it right away. I never confuse what sounds best with what's convenient to put into my ears. All that said, I mean, because I don't want to come across like a Luddite or like some purist, but they've never come close to replicating the experience of listening to music on vinyl and the sound of listening to music on vinyl. It's just what it is. It's just that simple. And I fully understand that in the modern world, to put an album on and to stare at an album cover and to sit and think and listen, and then after 5 or 6 songs, get up and flip it over and start side 2. That's nothing my kids understand. That's nothing that's nothing a lot of people don't have interest in. But the fact that it still is there, and the fact that younger generations, my daughter, she's 18. If you walked into her bedroom, she's got album covers all over her walls. She discovered vinyl on her own a few years ago, and it really connected with her in a way that it never did with my son. It just clicks or it doesn't. My son listens to music 24/7, but he doesn't want to go through he doesn't worry about whether it's on vinyl. He's not concerned with the turntable experience. My daughter, it was like this. The first time something just snapped and she was like, "Hey, can I get a turntable for my room?" And I looked at her and I was like, "Yes, you can, thank you." I never wanted to be the dad that forced my worldview or my musical taste, I should say, down my kids' throats. And they grew up with such a unique experience. Anyway, when your dad's in a band, you grow up, you lose a little of the excitement of going to gigs when you've never not gone to gigs. You know what I mean? Like to them, It was like, backstage at an amphitheater and you're hanging out and the band, that's normal to them. I would have fallen over dead at 13 if I'd walked onto the side of a stage and seen a rock band playing. We've had very different lives, but it's a really long-winded way of saying I still am a big fan and a big proponent of vinyl.
Well, obviously we love that here too.
Yeah.
And just from this side of it now, it is great to see. We have, I have people ask, okay, what's the demographic? Who's coming into your store? And I have to say, you know what? It's all over the map. I get retirees, I get people our age, I get young kids and high schoolers coming in, people with their grandparents.
It's awesome.
And it's great to see that interest in this format. And
well,
that's why
Michigan's very own Jack White has lived in Nashville for quite a while now, and we're buddies. We've known each other for a long time. And some of that Third Man stuff, just his entire commitment to vinyl, I've read things and I've talked to people who've taken shots at him for doing that. And I can say that with him, it was not, he's not waving a flag and saying, I'm going to lead the revolution. It's a pure act of passion. It's just how he sees the world and wants the world to be. And it's funny because he's thriving in that. You know what I mean? Like when you do things for that reason, you're eventually going to find that there's a lot of like-minded people out there. You know what I mean? And it's amazing to go to the Third Man store here. I know the one in Detroit's amazing. I'm not been, but I've certainly seen photos and know a lot of people that are in that area that love it. You walk in there and like you said, there's people I'm 55. I see people that are my age and older, and I see middle schoolers, and they're in there and they're in the little bit, they're listening, and then they're putting the record back. For the people that it works, it really works. You know what I mean? It's great. It's for our generation. I mean, this was my life, was going to the basement, shutting the door, and just losing myself in albums.
Was the way to go.
Yeah.
Well, moving forward, you have been very, very busy as well, post Black Crowes and everything in that respect. Tell me a little bit about the book. This came out in 2019?
In the fall of 19, yeah. It's a, it's a book about me, and I happen to be in a band for a lot. It's my period of. It's a book about my experiences in Mr. Crow's Garden, and then ultimately the Black Crowes. It's not a definitive history. It's not a history book. It's a personal experience book for me. I spent 27 years off and on, in a band that wasn't a normal band. In that, we put that thing together. I moved to Atlanta and I met a guy, and we became immediately overnight. We were fast friends, and we were best friends, and we were inseparable. And he'd already started a band with his little brother. And then I joined it. And then it was this little three-headed monster on the local scene, always trying to find the right fourth guy. And then we tried to find the right fifth guy. And we were going through the plan, in the late 80s, our band had one concept: get a record deal. That was it. That was the whole goal. Get a deal. Get on the road and get out of Atlanta, and let's just go live the life. Let's go do this thing. And we had an incredibly simple mindset in that regard. I mean, it really was that simple. We're going to do this. We're not going to plan. We don't have linear goals. We can't really map out a strategy, but by God, we're going to throw everything we have in the same direction, and we'll see what happens. And it's amazing what, a small group of like-minded people can accomplish, as long as they don't care about the results, and as long as they don't care about the consequences, and as long as they don't care about who gets credit. You can move a mountain. And we did. The band that started playing together in the summer of 1987 sounded nothing like the band that recorded Shake Your Moneymaker 2 years later. We weren't there yet. The band that recorded Shake Your Moneymaker, 2 years after that, we were an entirely different, much more formidable rock and roll machine. We were on a really steep growth chart, if you will, for those first few years as a local band and then as a touring band. And along the way, made a lot of great decisions, made a lot of terrible decisions, we missed an opportunity to have a lot of really important conversations. You know what I mean? When a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old agree to do something together, without discussing things like ethics and values and morals and true when you don't really know who you are yet, it's hard to say who you are as a group. When three people that don't know themselves say, let's do something together, and we all agree on what we want, it's impossible to understand how different you define certain words. You can say you want the same things, but it's really not. You necessarily don't. It's like, I'm not trying to be too ethereal here. We didn't have, we had conversations that late teens and early 20s people have, which is, let's have a few beers and listen to records and let's go try to be a rock band. That's as far as we took it, when you do fast forward and suddenly you're talking about a bunch of guys in their mid 30s and you're having kids and you're just trying to grow up, it can be really hard to do that when I said towards the end of the book, you have wings and you're handcuffed at the same time. You have this amazing opportunity to do whatever you want. And the very thing that gave you that opportunity can feel like a prison at times. And without a real commitment to self-awareness and without a commitment to stop judging each other and to allow each other to grow and evolve, you can be in a lot of trouble. And also, that's the story of most bands. You know what I mean? Most bands, especially if you hit it, there's a reason you don't see brand new bands of guys in their 30s, because by the time a bunch of guys are 30, they're not going to hop in a van and then get on a bus for 2 straight years and just go do it. You're like, what kind of life is this? I have a life. We were the perfect age. We didn't have anything else. And so getting onto a bus for 350 shows to promote an album, that made perfect sense to us. You know what I mean? And then to go do it again for the second record, that made perfect sense. That made perfect sense to us. And so that success can be an amazing thing. It can be exhilarating, and then it can be really suffocating because it keeps you from when you turn 30 and you look around at the 30-year-olds you went to high school with, you're like, those guys kind of seem like they're a little more together than I am. And then they're looking at you going, they come to the show and it's their one night to cut loose. And they're like, your life is amazing. And I'm like, and I'm thinking, yeah, but you have a lazy boy and you get your own TV at night. It's funny, you have a very distorted, your reality becomes, and it is your reality, when your fantasy, when your dream world becomes real, it's hard to understand. Well, you have to set new goals. You have to get that. You have to change your perception on what your next dream is, because now you're living that, and it can be very confusing. And I think it was for all of us, for sure. But like I said earlier, you know what? I'll say this and then I'll get off this. But the one thing we did right was we always really stayed very focused on the gigs. We would still listen to what we did. We would work. We sound checked every day for at least an hour every day. If you ever saw the Black Crowes on tour, 99 times out of 100, we had already been playing music that day together for at least an hour, working on new songs, working on new jams, working on, we'd break down the smallest little turnaround in between 2 songs and a little connector jam. And we'd spend an hour on it to make sure, we never lost sight of that stuff. So that was
consummate professionals.
That was our greatest strength. I mean, in the midst of the cacophony of that band, we rarely hit the stage 1 minute late. We were ready to go always.
Well, nowadays, though, people can catch you on the radio nightly on Steve Gorman Rocks. Tell me a little bit about how this came about.
Well, I'd been doing radio for years. I did sports talk radio initially, which I started doing in 2009 in Nashville. I moved to Nashville in 2004. My wife and I came here. It had long been the plan. At some point, we knew we were going to end up in Nashville for a variety of reasons that all still make sense, thankfully. And I used to sit in on a local sports talk radio show just as a guest every now and again. Huge sports fan my whole life. And in fact, when I was a college student, I'd been a broadcasting major. And I thought in the 80s, if you'd said, what are you going to do? I would have said, I'm going to be a sportscaster. I wanted to be a drummer, but I just didn't understand how you did that. There's no plan. I didn't see a path. I was like, oh. And then ultimately I realized, I have to drop out of school and buy a drum kit. That's the path, and that's what I did. But when I was still in school, I was doing broadcasting. I had after the band took off, it was the farthest thing from my mind. But when I started doing it kind of regularly here in town, I started to see this. I got this sort of idea for a show. And it was basically just, I wanted to do a show that was a bunch of fans as opposed to guys who were pretending to be experts. I wanted to do a show where because I have a bunch of musicians that love sports. along the way on the road is that in a band, you meet a ton of professional musicians and they come in the dressing room and all they want to do is rip off a guitar solo in front of 10,000 people. And all I ever wanted to do was shoot 3-pointers in the NBA. You know what I mean? It was like, you have a lot of common ground. Like right away, you're like, man, you have the coolest job. And it's like, no, you have the coolest job, you know? And I just always, my life was always spent there's two things I will talk about and argue about passionately: sports and music. That's everybody I knew. Who are your bands? Who are your teams? And so I actually was talking to the program director of the local sports station in Nashville, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to get you on once a week to do a regular feature. I could, I can get a sponsor. I could throw you a couple $100, but you're really good. Could you do a couple hours every Thursday afternoon?" And my response was, "Well, yeah, but I'd rather have my own show." And and he looked at me and he goes, well, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." And he goes, "What is it?" And I said, "It's musicians talking sports. And this is Nashville." And he went, "Okay, cool. You want to try it Sunday night?" And and then the first time I went in on a Sunday night, and I literally 8 o'clock, red light comes on, and I said, "This is Steve Gorman Sports." I mean, I was like, what the hell did I just talk myself into? But long story short, that turned into a pretty big show locally here. And then for 5 years, it was a national show. It was on Fox Sports Radio from 2014 to the end of, it was just under 5 years. It started in January of 14 and went into September of 18. It was a different show once it went national. It's a very different, formula for what makes good radio. But it was a blast. We had a great time. My cousin came and did the show with me. I needed a co-host for the national version. And it was a whole lot of fun that did run its course. I got a little fried after, going into approaching the 5-year anniversary. I was thinking, do I really want to go through another NFL season and just talk football 5 days a week? And, I love it, but I came into it through the side door. This wasn't my primary motivation in life to be a sports talk radio host. And so it was a lot of fun, but I could tell I was getting burnt. I was crispy. And so, and while I was doing that though, I did have some thoughts on doing like a rock show. When I was still touring and in the Black Crowes, I never would have wanted to do rock radio. It was just too close. It seems like it just didn't make sense to me. Doing sports for a few years really sort of cleansed that palate. And I started thinking, well, I think maybe now it would make more sense for me to do a show in the rock realm. And we pulled the plug on the sports show. And then I was writing my book, and that was great because I needed some time to really focus on the book. I finished that, got that whole thing edited. But as soon as I stopped the sports show, I had people contacting me about, are you interested in doing something else? And so we were putting together the show that became Steve Gorman Rocks was in the works within 2 weeks of me getting off the sports show. And as it turned out, I had made this comment offhanded. I need a year off. I kept saying I need a year off. I got exactly a year off. I finished on September 7th, 2018. I started the new show September 9th, 2019. And I was like, hey, that actually worked. Like, wow, you say stuff loud. If you keep saying stuff enough, you can manifest it into reality, apparently. But so we've been on the air for, coming up on a year and a half now with Steve Gorman Rocks. But of course, the last year has been pretty interesting because by the end of March last year, they closed our studios. So we had to figure out, how do we put on a radio show from home? How do we make this happen? And it was a little trial and error. And thanks to my brilliant executive producer and everybody else that works on the show, we figured it out. And right now, we're just in the groove. It's a lot of fun. It's 5 hours a night of music we all love. You know what I mean? Like I can still sit here and we come out of, hell, I mean, not even Led Zeppelin or AC/DC or the bands that I grew up obsessing with. I mean, I'll listen to Any Way You Want It from Journey, and I'm just riding along in 10th grade thinking about, man, I wonder if I should ask her out to the dance, or, it all takes me right back. And those songs too, a lot of the music on the show, I went out of my way not to hear for years because, I heard it all in real time. And I was there in the 70s and I was there in the 80s. And I wasn't necessarily listening to a lot of classic rock in general, just because I'm always listening to new music or whatever music I want. I was actually surprised when the show started at how much I loved hearing all these things. I've heard them all a million times, but again, not for a long time. I wouldn't have expected to be air drumming to Rush songs again at 55, but I do it every night. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's I do talk about this a lot, and I probably get a little too soapboxy, but that music is, I really do think it still resonates. I think that kids still discover music from the 60s, late 60s, 70s, and 80s, because it's music that it's if you're listening to a newer band, if you're listening to Jason Isbell, for example, right now, if you're listening to Wilco, or if you're listening to anybody that's actually playing instruments, if that's sort of your vibe and you're a teenager, and then you take a minute and actually put on, an Eagles record, for example, it's gonna resonate with you. That's actual people playing instruments on songs that were really well crafted. And you put on a Steely Dan record, you put on a Genesis record, you put on a Pink Floyd record. As out there as those bands ever got, it was still people playing instruments with their hands and putting their heart right into things. And I just think that the literal and figurative electricity of music played by humans on things made out of wood, it's never not going to translate. It's always going to find an audience. Much in the same way that vinyl still scratches that itch. The music that we play on the show, the music that we do Sunday nights on the vinyl side show, those records, that music is really eternal.
So the Steve Gorman Rocks heard, as you said, every night, weeknights,
Monday through Friday,
for 5 hours. And how many stations are you on with that?
We're on about 50, high 40s, low 50s, I think. I try not to pay too much attention to that. It's not my job to get new affiliates. There's smart people that do that. I just focus on putting on a good show.
You're reaching a lot of people, though, with the music, and that's what's important.
Yeah, it's coast to coast, yeah.
Now, you mentioned vinyl sides, and this is a little more specific.
Mm-hmm.
This is a show that's heard in the mid-Michigan area on Wheels 104.5 FM.
Yep.
But they're also available online. And that is specifically very, very dedicated to vinyl and a whole side of an album. Now, nowadays, you can look, especially with digital music, it's made to be broken up. It's made to be put onto a playlist or a Spotify list or somewhere,
mm-hmm.
song to song to song to song.
Yep.
And I think a lot of folks have lost track of, albums. Vinyl is meant to be listened to front to back.
Yeah.
Side A to side B. And I think is that what you think vinyl sides really plays into well, is that experience of listening throughout?
I think it's fantastic. I think, when you, it is. And it's a reminder that songs are great. I love songs. I love a good song. A song that leads you into another song, that leads you into a third song, that takes you to a fourth song, where you start to cover different ground, but there's a through line, whatever it could be. It could be lyrically, it could be just sonically, but when bands make albums, when they made these great albums and they put them together, the song order was every bit as important as the mix. It was more important, in fact, because they knew people are going to sit down and listen to this side of a record. They're going to go from A, B, C. If it's 4 songs or 6 songs, the order is everything. And the coolest part about vinyl sides is that, it's like, well, we only got 30 minutes here, so let's take advantage of this and take you back to a time when the whole thing mattered. Like we said earlier, when you sit down with an album, you've got the lyrics printed, or you've got the artwork, or you've got something that's tangible. You're holding it and you're looking at it, and it's a part of the whole experience. There's just nothing more important to me. There's nothing I'd rather do with 30 minutes of my time. So hopefully the show is accomplishing that for some people. And as I say every Sunday, you can, those records are all available at your shop, and you are doing the Lord's work by providing people with a place they can go to tap into that.
Appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Very true.
So, yep. And again, vinyl sides can be heard on Wheels 104.5 in the mid-Michigan area, but they also do broadcast online.
Yeah.
So folks can catch that on Sunday nights at 6 o'clock Eastern.
Yep.
Cool.
That's a fact. By the way, I might as well mention, I am a Muskegon native.
Are you now?
Yeah.
Okay,
my folks are both from Detroit. And in 1965, my dad was working for the Brunswick Company up there in Muskegon. working on some bowling pins and bowling equipment and stuff. So
Wow.
I'm the youngest of 8, really big family, but I was there and we left shortly after my birth. We moved to Baltimore, but duty called. He got a great job over there. But yeah, so I have a lot of family on both sides, my mom and dad, still up in Michigan. So,
That's
like the
great.
first time the Black Crowes played Detroit, we opened for a band called Junkyard in March of '90. And, to walk into a city like Detroit, we'd never been there, but, I had like 9 people, Steve, like I had the family out, anytime we've
That's
played,
cool.
anytime we've played up there, we've done a lot of gigs in Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, East Lansing. You went to Northern. We played in Marquette in '93. We played at the hockey arena up there.
Lakeview Arena. Yes.
That's it, Lakeview Arena. And it was February of '93. It was kind of cold.
Just a little. I would be surprised then if they even bothered taking the ice off. Maybe they just threw a carpet over for you guys.
I think they did, because it was so cold in the building. Like, we stayed on the bus until it was showtime, and we walked in, and I never warmed up. We played a full show under the lights, and I was freezing the whole time.
Well, that's interesting. You know what? I kind of sort of remember that.
Yeah.
I was out of college by then, but I was working television. So I would have been up there in '93 still.
Yeah.
I missed you guys. I'm sorry about that. It's unfortunate.
It was a good night. It was a good show. I do remember that. We were killing it.
Lakeview. Well, I'm going to probably cut this out, but Lakeview was just a barn. The music in there was just always.
Now, you would have needed you would have had to cover your ears a lot to make sense of it. I'm sure it was swirling around.
It was. I had, God, I think it was Nugent and Damn Yankees.
Oh, really?
I covered them when they were there.
That's
and
funny.
it was horrid. So, well, Steve, it has been a great pleasure talking with you. And I want to encourage fans of the Black Crowes and fans of Steve Gorman Rocks to check you out online. Where can folks find you? Where can they find your book? Where can they find your music?
stevegormanrocks.com. If you're looking for the radio show, that's the easiest place to find it. And all the social media platforms are right there on that website. My personal Twitter is SGSFOX, SGS Fox. And then, my music, I have a band called Trigger Hippie, and we've been sitting on our hands for a year along with the rest of the world. But we put a record out in the fall of '19, and we had been touring with that. And then, of course, everything stopped. But, Trigger Hippie, it's HIPPY. That's an easy band to find. Everything's online. These days it's easy. You just say GORMAN. Find me on the internet. It's easy.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well,
and the book is available anywhere. I mean, you can, anywhere you buy books, you can find Hard to Handle: The Life and Death of the Black Crowes.
Appreciate that. Again, Steve Gorman, thank you so much for being with us here on the Record Show. What a great pleasure talking with you, and I wish you all the best as 2021 drags us ever forward.
Yeah, right on, brother. Thanks.